So hello. First of all, to start out, to the bike students, could you tell us your name and where you were?
Yes, gladly. I was born in Kelowna, BC. My parents of Japanese descent, they were Japanese. My mother was a second generation because she's born in Stevenson, BC.
Okay.
Fishing community.
Okay.
And my father was born in Wakayama, King.
Okay. And can you give us your name too?
Oh yes, my name. Sorry, I'm not very good.
No, you're great. Yeah.
My name is Morisawa.
Okay.
What was it?
And where was your father from?
From Wakayama Prefecture,
Yes,
and the village of Miyamura.
Okay. Okay. So if your father's from Wakayama and your mother's from Stevenson,
Yeah.
how did your family end up in Kelowna?
Well, my mother was born, although she was born in Stevenson, she was taken back when she was 10 years old to Japan, in the same village, mind you. And so when my father, who was in Canada then, and he was of age and he was getting old, I guess the parents are getting worried about him, and in his early 30s, decided to go back to Japan and that same village, and they arranged that he marry the mother who was from Nakata. Now they decided that they were going to make a living in Canada. Although in the 1930s it was very difficult. They thought it was a little bit better than what they would try to make a living in Japan, in the village or whatever.
Okay.
So they decided to go to Kelowna because before that, my father's sister, my aunt, was married to a very drunken person, and and he was, they were there beforehand, and they said, well, there's a chance of making a living in Kelowna.
Okay.
So they called them over, and
what was Kelowna like before the war?
it was very agriculture. Yeah, not much more than that, I don't think.
And what did your father do? What was he doing there?
Well, he was a worker for the Bowman family.
Okay.
And worked in the orchard, picking, harvesting, apples, and also helped in the vegetable area. So the Bowman family let us live in a little shack beside their farm. Okay. And that's where I was born. Okay. Older sister was born first, of course. Okay. She's older than me. I was born second, and then another brother was born. Right. Okay. So they tried to make a living, and they couldn't. But in the meantime, my aunt and her husband, but they separated. Right. And my aunt decided to go back to the coast. Okay. And she bought a little place there in Victoria. And my aunt thought that make a better living maybe back in the coast. Right.
What year was this?
I guess it's about 35.
Right, okay.
35, 36.
Okay. Okay. And I know you were very young then, but between like 1935 and 1940, what do you remember about your life?
The whole scenario is that I enjoyed myself as a youngster.
And when you were young, what was the relationship between yourself and the other people in the village? Like as a Japanese, was there any prejudice before the war?
Oh no, they're very, very friendly. Everybody were in the situation they were struggling. Right. And
struggling financially.
Financially and trying to make a living, struggling that way. But they were a little bit better off than being, my parents, I'm talking about my parents, better off, a little bit better off than being in Kelowna. Right. And so he thought he made a good move. Right. And so he was able to purchase an acre property, and he built a house himself,
And this was in Victoria?
In Victoria, just outside of Victoria.
Okay, so things were starting to get better
Started
for
to
your
get
family.
better, yes.
Right.
And my father cleared the land, you know, but there was nothing there except that he had to till it.
So he basically made everything himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he had no money to
Right.
hire anybody to plow the
Right.
field, so he dug every inch of that
Wow.
1 acre by a shovel.
So
You know.
then in 1941, of course.
Yes.
Do you remember what happened, like Pearl Harbor? Do you still remember that at all? Or do you have any recollection of that?
Not too much, except that there were air raids, and we had to get tar paper put
Right.
up against the windows,
Mm-hmm.
and no lamps, just
Right.
a candle.
As an 8-year-old, of course, you're just a little boy, but what did you think about, like, when Japan has a war against Canada? How did you feel as far as your identity, or how did you feel?
And I could see where I saw some of the worries and stress when this happened is I looked at my parents' face, and you know, a lot of worry.
Right.
What's going to happen?
Right.
Especially when the government announced that
Right.
that we're to be interned.
Right.
You know, they set up a security commission. You
Right.
know, and that we were to be, from what I understand, we were to be taken 100 miles
Right.
to the interior.
Do you remember how you felt? How much of that did you understand when that happened?
Well, there was what I remember when that happened was that my father was in a real hurry to get the situation under control somehow, because right away the authorities came around the house and said, "You're to move a certain day."
And how much could you take with you?
Yeah,
Of
very little.
Right.
And it says they confiscated everything.
Right.
Okay. Our little Model 8 car that was made into a truck, that was taken away.
Right.
I don't think we owned a radio, but we did have a box camera.
Right.
You know, Kodak box camera.
Right.
And the only thing that we had with us before we left was a duffel bag, a couple long duffel bag, and that's our personal possession.
What happened to the house that your dad built from him? What happened to
Well, that was all taken over. Yeah.
But that's like, how does that make you feel? I mean, your father, from nothing himself, worked the land and built it from nothing, and then they just take it.
Well, afterwards, when we grew a little older, I why was it taken away?
Yeah.
I couldn't really understand.
Right.
Knew it was a war.
Right.
And my parents, well, we're enemies.
Right.
You know? And I sort of had that feeling.
Right.
The reasoning behind it, we were deemed as enemies. So that's why they taken us, and they took us into a what they call secured area.
There's one thing though that I don't understand, is that you said before you had friends that were German.
Yes.
But if you think about it, during the war, the Germans were enemies of Canada.
Yeah, well, they
too,
were
not
German
just,
descent.
but you're from Japanese descent.
Yeah,
Why
well,
should that
it
matter?
was during the immediate scenario then. The war started.
Right.
Pearl Harbor.
Right.
You know, if they look Japanese or name is Japanese, round them up.
Right.
And this is what I understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so tell me, after 1941, Pearl Harbor happened, and you had 2 days to leave.
Yes.
Where did your family go?
Well, of course, we were in a clearing area in the Hastings Fire.
Okay. What was Hastings?
Well, we understand that it was a temporary.
Right. It was basically a horse stable, right?
Yeah, it was. They had to make living areas.
Right.
And the horse stables, and there was a exhibition hall where Army bunk beds were put in, and the only separation between families was a curtain or tablecloth or something, and straw mat mattress, horse blankets. Yeah.
What was the weather like?
Weather was, from what I remember, didn't rain too much.
Okay.
Yeah, didn't rain too much. Okay. And we had, well, from what I can understand, I had lots of fun.
What did you do there? How did you have?
Oh, we got into, we played slingshot games. We climbed fences. Well, just like any young kid, you know.
Right.
We try to keep busy.
Right. Could you tell like how your mother and father were feeling at the time? Did they change at all after? Could you tell?
Well, again now the future, like a blind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's going to happen?
Right.
You know, but they said that only thing what they could do was go with whatever. Right. What was dictated upon,
right?
You know, they had to follow,
right?
And everybody else was doing it,
right?
They couldn't. There's no energy, or
right?
No means or support from any protest group. There was no protest group,
right?
And Caucasian groups, this is a democracy. We were taken away, even though there was a war.
Right.
There was no such thing. So we had to just go with the.
To me, it's just like, of course, I was not around. It sounds almost like you're treated like almost like you're in prison, a kind of fun prison, but it kind of feels like a prison.
Yeah, sort of like that. We just rounded up.
Right.
Taken to a set place.
Right.
Taken away our rights.
So you couldn't go anywhere, right?
Yeah. Taken away our freedom, our rights. Yeah. That is the main.
Right.
Thing that's happened
because
of the war.
Right. Okay, so how long were you in Hastings?
If I remember, from March until September.
42 or 42? Maybe 42. Maybe 40. Probably 42.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then where did you go after that?
We had a long train ride. Train run into a place called Roseberry, just before New Denver.
Okay. Can you tell us about what that was like?
It was, I can remember it was a steam engine, dirty air. We opened the window, all this smoke, exhaust coming in. Before we left, there was a stove, and we were able to get bread, and I got hungry, so I put bread up against the chimney of the stove, and I'm making toast. And I wasn't allowed to do that, you know. So I kind of turned, and my whole elbow got burned against that chimney. And that dirty air and dusty train, my whole arm was infected when I got to New Denver.
Okay, tell me about what was life like there.
The life when we first got into New Denver was very, isolated area. And
can you tell a little about like what is New Denver? What is it?
Well, New Denver is by a lake, Slocan Lake. Okay, and it reaches from Slocan to Roseberry, and on the shore side. There was an orchard that was built into an internment camp. Yeah. And it was only a walking distance, maybe half a mile from the town itself.
Okay. So before the war, New Denver was pretty isolated.
Isolated, yes, in the East Kootenays, yes. Right. Because of the mountainside, the lake.
And where did you live? What was your living quarters when you were there?
Our living quarters were a shack with 2 bedrooms